important to the Black community.
Good Sunday and welcome to the Black Perspective. Although he has not officially announced his intention to run for office in 2028, former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg remains a key thought leader and voice of the Democratic Party. BIN News anchor Bri Wood recently caught up with him at this year's National Urban League Conference and shares her conversation with him on today's show.
Joining me now is Mr. Pete Buttigieg, former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Navy Reserve veteran, and one of the nation's leading voices on infrastructure, economic opportunity, and the future of American communities. Former Secretary Buttigieg is speaking at the National Urban League Conference, where leaders from across the country are focused on advancing equity and empowerment. Former Secretary Buttigieg, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. During your time as Transportation Secretary, more than 70,000 infrastructure projects were launched across the country. As those projects continue to take shape, what lasting impact do you believe Americans, particularly underserved communities, which oftentimes are where Black and brown people live, will see over the next decade?
Well, even as we speak, people are getting good paying construction jobs working on those projects. Commuters are having a better transit or road commute because of those projects, and they are ongoing. And we sought to be very intentional about underserved communities. I'll give you just one example. One reason why I knew it was very important to support the Red Line extension in Chicago was because I met residents from neighborhoods like Roseland. This is inside the city limits of Chicago, but if you live there, and you want to get to a job downtown in the Loop neighborhood, that can be more than an hour, up to an hour and a half, if you don't have a car to get to that job. I know people who live in a community called Roseland, same name, which is 90 miles away in Indiana, who, if they do have a car, could get to downtown Chicago in the same amount of time as people within the city limits who didn't have good transit. And so we knew that we needed to do something about that. And whether it's a large community like that or a much smaller community that's just big enough to have a bus system, but not dense enough that they had a bus system serving residents well, we knew that economic opportunity depended on making sure people had better transportation. Same thing with safety. Huge disparities. Rural and Black residents and tribal residents are among those who have the most the most severe impacts of roadway crash deaths, partly because they're not as likely to have good sidewalks or good alternatives to get around. These things add up into a picture that we know we could improve. We did everything we could. The Trump administration has reversed some of our work, but not all of it.
So why was it important for you to be at this year's National Urban League Conference?
Well, you know, the theme of this conference, the American dream and keeping the American dream alive, making sure it reaches everybody, is central to what I care about and what I work on. You know, there was a time when far more Americans than today could expect some kind of, not guarantee, but confidence that they were going to come out economically ahead of where they started. For Black Americans, that has often been a dream deferred or a dream denied. We've seen Black unemployment. It is not only double what it is for white Americans, it's also on track to be double what it was just a few years ago. So we know that we've got to deliver change. Here at the Urban League, there are business leaders and civic leaders working together to make sure there is more access, more opportunity, and more fairness in politics at a time when districts are being manipulated to help make sure that people with unpopular policies like cutting Medicaid and cutting taxes for the wealthy can still win. We've got to come together to change that. Good work on that going on here at the Urban League, and I wanted to be here to be part of it for myself.
Many communities of color have long faced transportation challenges, as you've mentioned, also limited access to jobs, healthcare, and education. So what progress are you most proud of in addressing transportation equity as you did? And then what work remains unfinished for you?
Yeah, as you pointed out, it's not just access to jobs, it's also being able to get to educational opportunities and health. There's so many people who, you know, part of the issue with health equity, part of why we have worse outcomes for everything from maternal health to life expectancy for Black Americans has to do with access to care. All of those are reasons why we invested in transit. We did the most federal money for transit ever in the history of the department as part of that infrastructure package. And we know that that made a difference. Everything from massive projects like finally delivering the 2nd Avenue subway to connect parts of Harlem that had been promised this for more than 50 years, through to making sure that small rural communities that might have a bridge that needed to be fixed got the funding they needed, because if the bridge was out, an ambulance would have to go around and it would take 20 more minutes to get to where it needs to be with lives on the line. I think about a community like York, Alabama, very small community, almost encircled by railroad tracks. And if trains were on the tracks, they couldn't get to where they needed to be. So we were working with communities to help fund ways to do railroad crossings, get around them, make them safer, sometimes take them out or do an overpass. All of these practical things, I know they're not the most flashy or the most glamorous, but I started out as mayor, and I know that so many things in our everyday life depend on these basic services. If we deliver those services and the resources and the dollars and the infrastructure in a more equitable way, then people have a better chance of thriving and living a life of their choosing. And that's, to me, one of the basic roles of government. And it's why it matters so much that we have a fair political system to get the right kind of people in government who care about it.
Absolutely. And as you just mentioned, you became mayor of South Bend, Indiana. You were just 29 years old when you became mayor, and later led a federal department with more than 50,000 employees. What leadership lessons have remained consistent throughout your career and help you navigate today?
Well, it was a big leap becoming mayor when I was 29 years old.
Yes.
And it was a very big leap going from mayor of the fourth largest city in Indiana to leading a department that had a $145 billion budget. It was bigger than the economy of most countries. But what I've found throughout all of that is that so much depends on having people that you trust and empowering people, not trying to be the smartest guy in the room, knowing that whoever's in charge of roads ought to know more about roads than you do, and whoever's in charge of the budget ought to know more about budgets than you do, and bringing some humility into that leadership. My faith teaches that leadership has a lot to do with service, and sometimes humbling yourself is more important than standing on a pedestal. I learned that, and sometimes was humbled by others who taught me a thing or two, even as they were challenging me. From members of the city council that I served with when I was mayor, to ordinary community members who said, "Hey, Mayor, you might think this program or project here is going well, but let me tell you a thing or two about how it looks from my porch." Learning to listen. Learning that listening is the better part of leadership, is something that started with me on the streets of South Bend, but came with me all the way to Washington.
And so you've been traveling the country, engaging with voters and supporting candidates in key races. What concerns are you hearing most from other Americans right now, regardless of political affiliation?
Yeah, we've been to more than 30 states just in the year and a half since I left the cabinet, campaigning for leaders that I believe in, whether it's leaders who deserve to be reelected, like Amelia Sykes in Ohio, or leaders who are stepping up in an uphill race who I believe can win, like Chris Jones running for Congress in Little Rock, Arkansas, Sean Harris, former Brigadier General and now cattle rancher, running for Congress in Marjorie Taylor Greene's old district, performing way ahead of what anybody would have thought possible. Working with mayors like the mayor of Tulsa, who invited me to do a town hall. We had a couple thousand people come out. And everywhere I go, especially in these town halls, talking to residents, what I see is that people just want government that cares about them, that can tell the pressure or even pain they feel when gas goes up because of this war in Iran that we shouldn't be in the first place. The concern they feel when their health care bill goes up, the premiums go up to a level as a result of this big ugly bill, otherwise known as the Trump budget. That means they might have to choose between a mortgage payment and a health care premium. People who understand that when the wealthiest people in the country are paying a lower tax rate than a teacher or a firefighter, something has gone wrong. They want it to be fixed. That doesn't mean they're automatically going to follow anybody who's just saying no to the people now in charge. You got to say what you're actually about. What are you going to do to make sure that one job is enough? Well, I think we have answers for that. Higher wages, fairer rules. But people want a plan. They want somebody who can fight, but they also want somebody who gets that it's not about the fighting, it's about what you can deliver.
I'll bring it back to the National Urban League. They've spent decades advocating for economic justice, civil rights, opportunity. What role do organizations like the Urban League play in helping bridge divides and strengthen communities in this moment, as you've been speaking about?
I believe the Urban League has a very important role to play in two ways. One, the national work of the National Urban League, for example, their State of Black America report, and the data they gathered, the agenda they laid out on everything from how to get more affordable housing in this country to how to respond to the Republican-led efforts to dismantle black power through redistricting. But the other thing I love about the Urban League is I was just visiting with the CEOs of the local community chapters, and every community or region has an Urban League organization locally that is trying to make sure that works in a particular place where you can pull together business leaders, civic leaders, and political figures and directly connect what's going on in that that community. Everything from a zoning decision to an economic development opportunity to a public safety concern, and make sure that each community is doing its part to address these disparities that have gone on for far too long.
Absolutely. And finally, if there's one policy area where you believe America cannot afford to stand still over the next 5 years, what would it be and why?
I think we've got to fix our political system. I care about economic issues like raising the minimum wage or getting more people health care or dealing with the tax code that has become so unfair. To make that work, we have to end the kind of gerrymandering that has boxed Black communities out of power, that has manipulated the makeup of state legislatures and Congress, and a political reform that tackles that kind of gerrymandering, and along with it tackles the role of money in politics, which most Americans agree has gone way too far.
Yeah.
We do that, I think it unlocks a chance to have all of these other questions and concerns, from civil rights to voting rights to economic fairness, go so much better.
Former U.S. Secretary of Transportation and former Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Mr. Pete Buttigieg, thank you for your time and for joining us on the Black Information Network here at the National Urban League Conference. We truly appreciate you making time for us today. Thank
Likewise.
you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Bri Wood for the Black Information Network.
Thanks, Bri, and special thanks to former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg for joining us today on The Black Perspective.